So let's go to sample 4. Okay. A university biomedical researcher is working with a coach to improve their interactions with colleagues. The client is a very analytical thinker and can easily explain detailed data points and complex graphs, but seems reluctant to share anything personal with the coach. In the previous sessions, the coach encouraged the client to describe how they felt at social events, but the client seems highly uncomfortable answering only with short one-word responses. When the client arrives to the session today, the client silently hands the coach a journal. The client has written several detailed entries over the last week about their experience attending a university luncheon, a faculty party, and a staff development workshop since their last session. While the client says little to the coach in the moment, their entries show deep reflections about the anxiety the client experienced at these events and their desires to overcome social anxiety. What should the coach do? Okay, so what do you think it's could be the potential competency this is
I mean, it's
focusing?
about the cultivate of trust and safety.
Yep. So it's more about trust and safety here. So I would then go to trust and safety as the key thing here. Okay. So now let's take a look at the 4 options. Option number 1. Acknowledge the reflection work the client has done and ask the client if they're comfortable exploring some of the emotions they described in their journal. Option 2, ask the client if they would summarize the entries they detailed in their journal for the coach. Option 3, ask the client to identify some steps they can take to overcome anxieties they wrote about. Option 4, ask the client what new awareness they developed about themselves through the journaling process. Okay, so based on your understanding of the competency 4, what do you feel could be the best possible option?
I mean, the first sparks immediately up because with the acknowledgement of the reflection.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to me the most logical in the first sight.
Yep, because of this word acknowledge. Acknowledge the work the client has done. So notice this phrase here, acknowledge the work the client has done. So this is a phrase that repeats itself in competency number 4, right? Acknowledging. Okay, so if we look at this, the answer is number 1.
Mm.
Yep, because why? Here, acknowledging this one, acknowledging respecting the client's work in the coaching process. So the word work in the coaching process. So you see, notice the phrase appears again. So if I notice the phrase appears again, most likely that's the answer. Yeah. So from here, okay. Now, then if we look at yeah, so this is what we mentioned earlier. Okay, if we look at the worst possible answer, okay, the answer is reviewed. Yeah, so we ask the client to identify some steps that they can take to overcome anxieties. Notice this one, identify some steps, which means I'm jumping too quickly.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that this is entirely wrong, but this is too fast, right? So imagine the client is like having anxiety and say, okay, what are some steps we can do? So number 3, it's what we call a solution focused, result oriented, outcome focused kind of conversational questions. And that's why I often say that solution focused, results focused, or outcome focused may not be a good approach to the conversation, especially in the first half of the conversation. Because if the client comes to me and say this, I'm having this challenge, then I ask them, what are some steps you can take? Then I've not acknowledged the trust. I've not done any relationship building, right? I'm so focused on the action steps, and that's why action-based learning, action orientation, solution orientation may not be the best approach the coach should take if we want to do co-creation and partnership. That's why if I look at all these answers, the worst one would be the coach focusing on how, what they're going to do, what they're going to do, what they're going to do. And that should be maybe the last thing or towards the end of the conversation, not the very start of the conversation.
Okay. Is it also, I mean, what I would have seen here as well, or would have been a question for me, that I do kind of a diagnose and about the anxieties, right? I mean, there is written about in the description about anxiety, but it's not a that kind of a diagnosis I'm doing Or is it something I can reassume the client already talked about in the past, or based on his behavior in the last session that he was very passive in a way?
Mm. Yeah, I can make reference from that because if you notice the start of this conversation is talking about the client is very analytical and da da da, it's very but then something happened and then they become more anxious. So there's a shift in behavior. So if I notice this shift, and that's where I can inquire a little bit about tell me more about what happened, tell me more about how you're feeling. So I always acknowledge the feelings first, explore the emotions, feelings, thoughts before going to the next steps. So this one is quite straightforward. The one that might be close, it's these words like new awareness. How would they summarize? These are things you can do in the coaching process, but it may not be the first thing you do. The first thing is always like acknowledging, honoring the space, showing concern, empathy, connecting with the client first, especially when the emotion is higher. Okay. Now you can also think about it. If today this scenario is about anger, the client is feeling angry, or the client is crying, what is the best action? What's the worst action? So there's something to think about, right? If the client's angry, upset, frustrated, the client feels very, very anxious, what are you going to do? Okay, so something to think about as well. Okay, good. So let's just take a look at so here, what I mentioned here is about premature problem solving. Yeah, because if option C, it's really like I'm jumping straight to problem solving, solutioning without really showing empathy and support first. So empathy, support before problem solving. Okay. Now, here, summary. Option A, because it's acknowledging, reflecting, acknowledging the emotions. Option C, because of problem solving, and then we've not explored the emotions of the client.